Well, you could have knocked me over with a feather. There I was in the back room getting the kids ready to come in, and what do I hear but the lot of you out here singing some words from the United Mine Workers Constitution, and in a church. Isn't that grand? Well, I've got to confess to you, although I was raised in a good Catholic home, once I left home, I haven't been going to church much. I think I'm headed toward what you might call an agnostic. I have just heard too many of these sky pilots preaching to the poor and oppressed and telling them they need to listen to their uppers and betters and do what they're told, whether it's your priest, whether it's the mine owner, whether it's the mill guards. Just follow instructions. Be good little sheep, and you'll be getting your reward in heaven. Well, I don't know about you, but what I'm fighting for is the opportunity for all of us and our families to get a little bit of that heaven while we're still here on earth, for Pete's sake. Hey. Well, enough of that, though. I think maybe the last time a lot of you heard of or read anything about Mother Jones might have been quite a few years ago, when I was down in the southeast part of your state, doing my best to support those poor miners who had been on strike for so long. That was a terrible time. We're not going to get into it today, but maybe sometime when we got a little more time, we could talk about those Colorado coal wars, the massacre at Ludlow. But today, I've got a different thing to tell you. I was up in Philadelphia. Now, there are about 700 fabric mills in Philadelphia. And I had heard that the working conditions there were terrible, especially for women and for the younger workers. So I went out and got myself a job in one of those mills, so I could see with my own eyes what was going on. And I am here to tell you, it would make your blood boil. There were young ones there, as young as 9 and 10 years old, maybe the ages of some of your children or your grandchildren. And they were working at least 10 hours a day, 60 hours a week. What they were doing in the fabric mill was reaching their hand through some moving machinery to tie the threads onto the spools. Sometimes getting a skirt caught, sometimes getting hair caught, sometimes getting a hand injured to the point of losing a finger. All of that for a measly 2 cents an hour. Now, I was there in the springtime, and outside the sun was shining in the beautiful blue sky. The little birds were singing their hearts out, and the beautiful roses were just starting to bloom. But none of that for these little ones. And then over on the other side of town, the mill owners sat in their fancy mansions, just sipping their tea, petting their poodles, getting richer every day off the blood and sweat of those little ones, and waiting for their children to come home from getting their education. And then, at the end of those long, long shifts, I followed them home. A long line of people in ragged clothes, too tired to even talk. I saw them throw themselves down on their straw pallets, maybe too tired to even stay awake for a meager meal, only to be rousted up the next morning by that factory whistle at 5 a.m. I saw burly foremen shoving people in through the doors if they were late, even paddling a few of them if they didn't work fast enough. And I saw their gnarled little fist, looking like someone who had been working for 80 years. Oh, I saw parents too. I saw plenty of parents working alongside their little ones. It wasn't that they didn't love their little darlings. It was because those children had to work or starve. Well, when you've seen cruelty like that, really seen it, you can't just walk away. You've got to try to do something about it, and if you can't do it yourself, it's important that other people learn about it. So, the first thing I did is I went out and I visited the owners of a newspaper and the publishers. And they told me that the mill owners themselves owned so much stock in those papers that they weren't about to publish anything that made those men look as greedy and as cruel as they really were. And I said, I've got stock too. I've got stock in those little children, and I'm going to arrange a little bit of publicity. Well, we all know that money is a powerful thing. But we know that there is also power in people, when people get together for a common cause. And a union has a lot of power too. So the head of the Mill Workers Union in all those mills around Philadelphia called for a great big meeting. And I stood up and I said, listen to Mother, and let me take your children on a march that could change the country. We need 100 children to march 100 miles from here in Philadelphia over to New York City so people can see them and they can hear our stories. Oh, when I finished speaking, people were a cheering and a clapping. Yes, a march it would be. And then some of the men who worked in the mills said, yes, we'll go along with the children. And the mothers, of course, needed to stay home with the little ones. So they packed some little knapsacks for their children with a tin cup and plate and fork and knife and prepared to kiss them goodbye. Well, it took me a while to plan this, but on July 7th, 1903, we were ready to start. So the children and the parents and mill workers all around assembled in a great big crowd outside a union office in the Kensington area of Philadelphia. By now, some of those newspapers thought, well, maybe we better send somebody over to see what the ruckus is all about. So there was flash powder a-flashing and people calling up things. And then one fellow louder than the rest said, where are you going, Mother? And I answered him back, we're going to see the president. Ooh, and the kids let out a whoop. Well, you see, this was my new plan. Why stop at New York? Why not go on out Long Island to that fancy schmancy summer residence of President Theodore Roosevelt himself? Oh, now, that got us a little newspaper publicity. Now, I want to tell you what we looked like as we lined up getting ready to go. At the front of our parade were 3 little children dressed in Revolutionary War costumes. Because just as those soldiers had been fighting for their freedom, my little revolutionaries were fighting for theirs. Then we had a big bass drum. We had 10 members of a drum and fife contingent. We had a great big flag. We had banners stretching out and signs. And at the end of the parade were 2 trucks with wooden trailers behind them, loaded up with provisions given to us by the grocers of Philadelphia. So out we started. Quite a sight there. 200 strong with the music playing and the flags a-waving, and people came out from their houses and their stores to see us. When we got out of town, they came out from their fields and their farms and their barns, and most of them cheered us on. Quite a lot offered us more food. Bless those farmers. And some even said, well, Mother, if the weather turns bad, I've got a barn over there you can get into. But most of the time, we camped out every evening by a stream or a river. And in the morning, the kids could jump in the water, freshen up, bathe themselves, and have a little fun. And to see them splashing and laughing and trying to swim, such a little thing and so much happiness, it was almost enough to make you cry. But tears weren't what they needed. So we planned the trip that every evening we could be in a town, even a little hamlet, maybe a big city, Bristol, Morrisville, Trenton, Hoboken, Jersey City, and we'd go into a town square, bang that drum, play the fifes, and we'd assemble ourselves a good crowd. And then one of the men would put up a little stool that we'd carried along so I could stand up on it and give my speech and tell them what was going on with these kids in the mill. I might say something like, look at that little feller over there. He's bent over like an old man from carrying bundles of yarn for the carpet factory that weighs 75 pounds. And then I might point out some of them that were missing a finger, and some that looked emaciated because they didn't really have any money in their family for decent food. And then when I finished talking, it was time for a little entertainment. Oh, I'm a big believer in drama. It's fine to tell people about something or to write it, but you gotta show them. You gotta show them the kids. You've gotta show them what's going on. So we had a couple of pairs of the children all dressed up, the girls in frilly skirts and the boys in maybe a vest and a hat. And they were portraying Mr. Mill Owner and his snooty wife. And so they'd prance about all hoity-toity and act out little scenes and things, and they would have the crowd in stitches. Then we'd take our flag and we'd pass it around like it was a hat for people to throw in their nickels and dimes. And that was a lot of money for some of those people who were just as dirt poor as the mill workers. And then on we'd go. Sometimes we got a ride in a train from the conductor and we could rest. But mostly we walked. For 14 days we marched in the hot summer sun, sweat pouring off us. For 14 nights we slapped mosquitoes. And by then, some of the children had had as much as they could do. I had told their parents we hoped to be back in 10 days, and we were already over that. So we put the children on the train with plenty of adults to help them, and back home they went with our blessing. So by the time we reached the outskirts of New York City, there were 37 children left and about an equal number of men. And then, you may have trouble believing this, but it's true, when we got off the ferry crossing the Hudson River, when we got off that ferry, there were 30,000 New Yorkers to welcome us to their city. They were waving signs and flags and cheering and clapping. What a wonderful thing that was. And then the next night, we had a torchlight parade down 4th Avenue We had the drums, we had the fifes, we had the flags. Down we went, and the streets were lined by 600 of New York's finest policemen in their blue costumes there, holding back the thousands of people who had come to watch the parade and stay to hear me speak. What a triumph, what a high point. And then the union had paid for all of us to stay a few days in a hotel right there in New York City so we could rest up and celebrate, and I could go out every night and I could give more speeches. Then I'm going to tell you something else you're going to have trouble believing, and it too is true. One night there in my hotel room, I heard a knock on the door. And when I opened it, there were two fellas in suits showing me some cards. Sure, and they were from the Secret Service. And they were there to tell me how wrong it would be for us to go and bother the president during his summer vacation. And I answered them politely. I did, and then I went out and made my speech. And then the very next day, hand-delivered to me, was a letter from the president's personal secretary. And what it said was that Mother Jones and her invading army would not be allowed on the estate. Invading army? I ask you, oh, what an idiot. But we had one more stop to make. We had been invited out to Coney Island, scot-free, so the kids could enjoy things they never even dreamed of. They rode the merry-go-round, the Ferris wheel, the roller coaster. They went around and saw all of the animals. They went to the booths, played all the games. What a thing, a whole day of play for children who'd never had such a thing. But then, as evening approached, we had one more little show for them. We put some of the kids, the youngest ones, in a couple of clean, empty cages and closed the door. And over there to the side of those cages was a great big sign that we had painted for us, and it showed a Roman emperor in his toga looking over and giving those kids a thumbs down. And then when people came by, the little ones would clutch the bars and look up at them like little caged animals or like innocent prisoners, which they were, prisoners of the system, prisoners in the mills. And I'd give my speech again one more time. And then after that, we put everybody on the train home except for 3 little boys, 2 men. And led by this crazy old lady, we went sneaking through the woods of Long Island toward Oyster Bay. And when we got there, we were sweaty, we were dirty, we were exhausted, but we were there. Surely he'd agreed to see us. We'd come that far. I'd written him a lovely letter. We were American citizens seeking redress of grievances to the head of our government. And then seeing that the invading army had come after all, the secretary came out, and we were told that the president was out. We were told we should write him a letter. We were told in so many words to get lost. So this was how my glorious campaign was to end, with 3 little boys crying because they knew now they had to go back to the mills. So was the whole thing just a big failure, are you thinking? Oh, hell no. You're not thinking that. What we did shone a great big spotlight on the evils of child labor. Thousands of people had seen those children and heard their stories. And that got thousands of good-hearted people thinking. And that got a lot of them knowing that they needed to join in that battle with us. Now we all know, you'd all nod your heads to this, we all know that the wheels of justice turn slowly. But sometimes you need a strong mother to get those wheels a-turning. Now, I thank you very kindly for inviting me to talk.